Hey everyone, my name is Neha Sivakumar, and in this video I'll be presenting my results from Lab 4, which focuses on Faraday's law. Quick overview, these are the topics I'll cover in this video. These include an introduction to the lab's purpose and methods, explanation of physical principles, observations from the experiment, brief explanation of my computational models, and some reflective Q&A. To preface this discussion, it's important to keep in mind the two main results from the lab. After experimentation and computer modeling, the experimental result for time taken for the bar magnet to fall through the tube is 1.26 seconds, and the computer-generated result is 1.32 seconds. Faraday's law relates time-varying magnetic field to a Curly electric field, whose path integral around a closed path is not zero but provides an EMF that can drive current. This current, in turn, produces a magnetic field which exerts a force on the source of the external magnetic field in this lab. The source of that external field is a falling bar magnet, and the induced current is driven in a tube of aluminum foil. The interaction between the falling magnet and the tube of aluminum foil produces an interesting result, which I explored in this lab. To perform this experiment, I had to collect observational data of a magnet falling through a conductive tube of aluminum foil, model the magnet/tube interaction computationally, then compare the computational predictions with my observed data. The two laws shown on the following slides were foundational to this lab. Faraday's law is the basic law of electromagnetism that predicts how a magnetic field will interact with an electric circuit to produce an electromotive force, EMF, a phenomenon known as electromagnetic induction. Additionally, Lenz's law states that the direction of the electric current induced by a conductor by a changing magnetic field is such that the magnetic field created by the induced current opposes changes in the initial magnetic field. Based on my observations while performing this experiment, I was able to answer the following questions. When asked why we can't use ferrous tubes like steel pipe while conducting the experiment, I observed that since ferrous tubes are made of iron, they can become an induced magnet as the bar magnet falls through them, and therefore the interaction between the two magnets will cause interference in the lab setup. What about how a magnet acts when it falls in free space instead of in a tube? I observed that here, a bar magnet dropped inside the tube falls significantly slower than it would if it were dropped in free space. Here, I have labeled the diagram of my experimental setup and listed all the associated measurements and data points on the right of the slide. After 5 trials, I averaged the time taken for the bar magnet to fall through the tube and found a result of 1.26 seconds. In the next slides, we'll see how the computational model was created in order to produce a result of 1.32 seconds. This screenshot shows an excerpt of the code that was edited to resemble the formula to calculate the magnetic field. Lines 106 to 122 in my code were edited to calculate the derivative of the flux with respect to time as shown in the formula written out to the side. Lines 147 through 149 of the code calculate the gravitational force of the magnet as negative mg. In this slide, 4 different chunks of code are shown, each corresponding with different formulae that calculate things like current in the ring, typical B field at each ring, net force on the magnet, and the magnet's velocity and position. And on this slide, the graph created by the running computational model is shown as well as representation of the current flow as the bar magnet drops through the tube. In the end, the result shown by the computational model is that the time taken for the bar magnet to fall through the tube is approximately 1.32 seconds. Now onto some reflective questions that help put the lab in perspective. Reflection question number 1 states, the intensity of the coloring on the tube indicates the magnitude of current flowing through each ring. Red and blue indicate current flowing in opposite directions. Which color corresponds to the clockwise current, as viewed from above, and which counterclockwise? How can you know? The answer is simple. Blue corresponds to clockwise current, while red corresponds to counterclockwise current. I know this because this is the only combination of colors and directions that could cause the bar magnet to slow down. Reflection question number 2 then asks, what happens to the dynamics of the system when you flip the magnet around? Well, nothing new would happen if we were to flip the magnet around. The only slight difference would be that the current would flow in the opposite direction that it does now. Reflection question number 3 asks, how does the total time in tube of your real-world system compare to that of your computational system? How might the computational system be made more accurate? Well, my model was pretty much accurate, as it rendered a result that was about half a second longer than the result of the practical model. To minimize even this slight discrepancy, I would split the tube into more rings and also account for any air resistance that the magnet is subject to as it falls through the tube. And finally, reflection question number 4 asks, what does the shape of the velocity versus time plot tell you about the forces acting on the bar magnet? Simply put, the positively and negatively sloped sections of the velocity versus time plot tell me that the forces were unbalanced while acting on the bar magnet during those time intervals. During the approximately 1 second period of time where the slope was 0, the graph shows that the forces were indeed balanced. The first challenge question asks about the change in dynamics of the falling magnet when the resistivity of the conductor were reduced as close to zero as possible. If this were to happen, the braking force would balance the gravitational force, which would stop the magnet from falling through the tube. The second challenge question asks how the presence of holes or slots in the tube would affect the ring currents in my model. If this was the case, the normal flow of current through rings in the tube would be disrupted in a way that is caused by the reduced magnitude of the braking force. Well, that's all for this lab. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video.